What is the National Flood Insurance Program? How does it work? What is being done to modernize and transform the program and how it operates? And how is innovation and technology helping? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my special guest, Jeff Jackson, Deputy Assistant Administrator, Federal Insurance Directorate at FEMA. So, Jeff, I'd like to start off with some context. Would you tell us more about the National Flood Insurance Program? Why is flood insurance so important, and why should people pay attention to it?
Well, the National Flood Insurance Program was created in 1968. It really was in a response to the fact that we were seeing more and more flooding in the nation. And one of the difficulties with that increased flooding is it was difficult to secure insurance in the private market and certainly at an affordable cost. The country wasn't really mapped for flooding, so we didn't have a sense of what the risk was. And finally, a profession called floodplain management was just coming into its own, and it really is a discipline surrounding how we manage, how we live and work in the floodplain. So all of those were the reasons why the NFIP was created. It's essentially a bargain between local governments and between the federal government. Local governments agree to pass our minimum floodplain management standards. We agree to work together with that community in order to map the floodplain and figure out what is high risk. And then finally, if the communities agree to do those things, we agree to sell them flood insurance. And if you are in any of the 22,600 communities in America that belong to the NFIP, which is virtually all, not literally all, but virtually all, you can purchase flood insurance. We're going to sell it to you. It's going to be at a risk-based price based upon your home and where you are. But we're not going to leave your state because there's too much flooding. We're not going to leave your area of the country because there's too much flooding.
You mentioned earlier, Jeff, the reforms that you proposed to Congress, and we can talk about that later, a little later. I want to dig deeper into them. But before we get there, I was hoping you could outline for me your strategic vision for the program and maybe highlight some of your key priorities for the program.
Absolutely. So really our vision that we work towards every day is to enable and support all Americans to reduce their evolving flood risk and achieve peace of mind. There's a couple of key pieces in there. One is evolving flood risk. We chose that language very carefully because part of what we're trying to get across to the American public is whether you buy a flood insurance policy or don't buy a flood insurance policy, we really want to work to educate the American public about flood risk and about what their flood risk is, and to avoid the mistake that we're all prone to make, which is that it hasn't happened to me before, so it won't happen to me in the future. And that as the climate changes, as we see more and more intense storm activity, that's a conversation that we need to continue to have. And then the term peace of mind is something that all insurance provides. It starts with an understanding of what your risk is and what protections you have in place today. And then achieving peace of mind, in my view, is making those kind of intelligent decisions, informed decisions about what insurance products you need to buy in order to prepare yourself for the types of risks that you face. In terms of how we run the insurance operation, it's important to be very customer focused. That's something that had begun before I arrived, but that we've continued. There have been times where, it'll shock your listeners to hear that people have been dissatisfied with the performance of government when it comes to ease and usability. And so we really believe government can set the example for how to interface, and in many cases does. Like a lot of things, we hear about the bad news, we hear about the missteps, but having a healthy respect for the fact that it's the little things that lead to those missteps. And if you do the little things every day, if you maintain that customer focus, then you're going to be more likely to be successful. And we're quite proud over the last number of years in the improvements that we've made and the outcomes that we've seen in terms of our claims process. We want the claims process to be as easy as it possibly can be. That should be when you have flood insurance and you've bought the policy and a claim happens, that should be the point in the process where you breathe a deep sigh of relief and are thankful that you purchased the product that you did because you have that financial protection in place.
That's wonderful. So, I'm thinking about your efforts to modernize the operation. And in particular, can you tell us more about your efforts to modernize Pivot, which I believe is this system of record for all of the flood insurance claims and policies? How has that transition to the new system of record shown a tangible operational impact for the program?
Absolutely. So I mentioned earlier that we had a lot of modernization and transformation work to do as recently as 5 years ago. We were on a 1960s style mainframe. So think the technology when we landed on the moon, that, kind of the big computers in the background, rooms of computers. That was what we were dealing with. And the primary impact that had on us as a program was just the amount of time that it took to get actionable information in order to respond after a large flooding event. It was about 60 days to get a report. And so, if today I was at a certain place in terms of number of claims, my report about today would be coming 60 days from now. And it led, as it often does when the right technology is not in place and technology lets us down, it was a lot of manual process. It was my predecessors would be calling around to the insurers that had the most amount of policies there, asking them what was going on, how much they had paid out, what their case reserves are. That's an insurance term, which is basically like how much you think the claim is likely to be worth. All of that was this manual process to go find. And we really didn't have great insight on things that we can easily do now, like mapping our properties by county, figuring out where within a county do most of our policyholders lie, and some of the things that we can do with very simple visualization tools now that we have a modernized system. So we're quite proud of the pivot system. It doesn't stand for anything, so we've let Washington off the hook by not having to learn another acronym. But what we have now is a near real-time cloud-based solution, something that has the ability to scale when we get lots of claims. We have that capability to scale to larger usage, and that something in steady state has the right amount of bandwidth that we need in order to do the things that we need to do in steady state operations. One of the reasons we're most proud of it it was the first modernization effort. We're undergoing a number of modernization efforts at FEMA. We went first. And the thing that we're as proud of as anything is that it was on time and on budget, which is practically blasphemous in the tech world. Absolutely. But like a lot of things that we've done in the last few years, we're just really enthusiastic about the fact that big things can be done. And so it really started with our system. A number of the other things that we have completed and are now working on were enabled by the system. We couldn't have modernized our rating methodology if we didn't have the state-of-the-art system. And it's something we're continuing to work on. We're taking it very much in iterative fashion, not the old waterfall, here it is, ta-da, reveal. More agile. So we continue to run agile sprints to develop, to work on usability and functionality. And so we're excited about not just where our pivot is, but where it can go.
So you mentioned the new rating methodology. I was hoping you could tell us more about the implementation of that new rating methodology. And what are some of the recent changes associated with it?
The new rating methodology is best understood by kind of starting with where we were before we changed. So the prior rating methodology was developed in the 1970s, and obviously we've come a long way in our understanding of risk since then, particularly in the use of catastrophic models and actuarial science. All have moved light years ahead in terms of the sophistication of those tools and of that science. The rate used to be primarily driven, were you in or were you out of the high-risk zone, and what was your elevation? And so that led to, over time, to a lot of unintended consequences. It led to the unintended consequence of if you were sitting just outside a high-risk area, you were underpaying, and the person inside the high-risk area was either paying about what was right or underpaying. And so that in or out way of looking at things didn't lead to an overall rate structure that was based upon your individual risk. The second thing is because the in or out was based on the flood insurance rate maps, which are the map that tells you if you have to buy or if you don't have to buy. Those maps don't account for rainfall. And as we've seen over the last few years, we've seen a lot of these unbelievably intense rainfall events. And so one of the things that the new methodology does, it allows us to capture all the risks that you potentially could face, whether it be rainfall, whether it be being near a river, whether it be storm surge, and it figures out what the probability of all of those are and assigns a probability to it, and then builds up a rate that captures all of the things that might happen to you in the coming year that come out as a rate. One of the most important things that it did is the use of replacement cost value in designing a rate. Perhaps the most problematic unintended consequence of the old methodology is that in many cases, lower value homes were subsidizing higher value homes because when claims time comes around, it's much more inexpensive to replace a kitchen, let's say, in a smaller value home than it is in a larger value home. And so taking away that unintended consequence and really assigning rates under the theory that, more expensive homes are more expensive to fix and less expensive homes are less expensive to fix was a critical move forward in terms of the rating methodology. And then finally, in terms of ease of usability, it's our insurance agents who operate with the rating engine using the portal that they use through the insurance companies that they work with. And we've taken what was a spreadsheet process to build up a rate that was prone to human error, that if maybe you didn't understand a word precisely correctly, you could make a mistake. And the rate generation process in the old methodology was something we know mistakes were made, and we know that we had a problem with that. And also, that's the position that we put everyone in by having to do manual calculations and having to rely on a spreadsheet. So we have a modernized rating engine. You put in all the inputs, it pings FEMA, it gets a rate back. It says, for these set of inputs, here's what we had you putting in, and here's the rate that comes out the other side. So we had quite a reputation, particularly amongst people who didn't sell a lot of flood insurance policies, as being difficult to understand. It took 2 and 3 and 4 hours to generate a rate, particularly if you'll take one of the training classes that we provide for agents and you have that basis of foundation, you can do a quote in about 10 or 15 minutes.
Are there any other key accomplishments you want to highlight? And more importantly, Jeff, how do you think the program, your office, continues to transform and evolve, and what's next?
Well, one of the important things that's next is direct-to-customer. We talked about that. One of the things we have not talked about is that on the unified regulatory agenda, we have updating our standard flood insurance form. Critically important initiative, particularly from the perspective of the insurance agent, but also for the customer. So starting with what it does for the agent, it makes our product look more like other products they sell, which is absolutely critical. It doesn't get into a lot of unique language to the flood insurance program. It looks and feels much more like a homeowner's policy was really what it's most analogous to. And so we see that as critically important in terms of usability of selling. Again, back to that customers want to buy and agents want to sell. So that making it look and feel more like other insurance products is absolutely critical. The second thing is it's going to introduce a number of endorsements, which gives policyholders choice. If you want your coverage to look a little bit different than what's standard, and of course we're all experienced with this in the private sector insurance world, we decide if we want that rental car coverage. We decide if, we want the extra money for damages to passengers and, medical bills for passengers. We make all those decisions in addition to the amount of coverage that we select. And so moving into a space where customers have options, they have choice, we think it's going to increase the understanding they have of the product better. We really are seeking to move the conversation about what it is you have away from after loss, which is when a lot of people it's like, okay, I've experienced this loss. Now let me find out what coverage I have. We want to take that back to the point of sale, and where policyholders can think back and say, oh yeah, I remember I did choose this additional coverage and I decided to not do this other one. And so I understand when my claims adjuster arrives the things that I selected because they'll have the benefit of having that choice at the moment of sale. And the final thing is just that it's what exists in the rest of the insurance industry. And I think the more we can be alike with that, the better results we'll have.
This has been the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Jeff Jackson, Deputy Assistant Administrator, Federal Insurance Directorate at FEMA. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at iTunes, Spotify, Audible, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.